Welcome back. This is the third episode of my podcast, Proverbs, God's Ancient Wisdom for Our Modern World. I'm James Chapman, your host. Nice to see you again. Why don't we jump right in here and start looking at what God has to say about our world in Proverbs Chapter 3. Let's get started. In Proverbs Chapter 3, we read the following. My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace, that is the word shalom, and prosperity. Now, what does shalom mean in the original text? Well, it means peace, safety, health, wellness, happiness, and prosperity. Now, I usually don't delve into discussions on the meaning of words unless clarity of the meaning is critical to the understanding of its use and misuse by false teachers. Now, only 3 times in the scriptures is this word shalom translated prosperity. In all the other uses, it involves the concepts of joy, happiness, and peace. Now, some teachers focus on the translation prosperity and imply or even teach outright that this promise, which it is not, obligates God to make you financially prosperous, which it does not. Now, in verse 3 and 4 and the subsequent verses, we start to see a pattern created called command and results, where we see, first of all, God says something that he wants us to do, the command. And then he shows you what the result will be when you follow that command. Now, you see that pattern beginning in verses 1 and 2, where it says, my son, don't forget my teaching, keep my commands in your heart. And then that's the command, and here's the result. Well, they will, first of all, prolong your life many years and bring you that peace and prosperity we just discussed. Now, in verses 3 and 4, we see this pattern repeated again where it says, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And then the results. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Verse 5 and 6 continue this concept where it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him. Here's the result. And he will make your paths straight. Now we see these admonitions to cling to certain concepts and attitudes repeated here. And it is important to remember that our actions are always preceded by our thoughts and attitudes. We will see this particular truth repeated many times in Proverbs. I mean, even Jesus himself made this clear when he was speaking to the people in the book of Matthew chapter 5. That's the speech that we sometimes call the Beatitudes. There, he emphasizes that sins like murder and adultery first occur in the heart, then conclude with the actual acts. Now, in verse 1, we see that God says, my son, don't forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. Verse 3 also says, these are actions or concepts, thoughts, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And then verse 5 goes on and says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Now, when God says something once, we really should take notice. But when he repeats it, he is driving home a point. You see, all the benefits listed in these verses are dependent on us following his directions. They're not absolute promises. They're not even absolute principles. They're all based upon following certain directions. He says, remember his teachings. Keep his commands. Live a life marked by love and faithfulness. Trust in him. Don't trust our own limited understanding. And then again, submit everything we do to him. You see, only when we obey the commands can we expect the benefits to follow. And these benefits are listed here. They're 1, long life; 2, peace; 3, favor; 4, good name with men. That's a reputation. A good name with God. Well, that's the pleasure of God and the pleasure from God. And 6, God will work with us and help us in our life pursuits. Who wouldn't want these traits in their lives? Let's continue with verses 7, 8, 9, and 10, where we see this command and results pattern repeated again. First, verse 7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Verse 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruit of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. Now, these verses, again, recommend certain behaviors and attitudes which will yield certain outcomes. Here again, we see those commands and results. Now, verse 7 is very interesting. It tells us, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. So, our normal inclination seems to be to disregard the ways of God and see just how much sin we can get away with. Now, this would be what we think are wise choices prior to submitting our lives to the leadership of God. And, without God in your life, it would be the only way of living which would seem reasonable. And frankly, without God, this is the only way of living that our old sin nature can allow. And unfortunately, many Christ followers still live their lives as if they were not Christ followers. But here, it is very clear. If we want to live a life which is pleasing to him, we must first fear and respect what he has to say. Treat it as the only thing that is true and the only thing that we should follow. And then 2, actively avoid, that is, shun, thoughts and actions which are contrary to what we know he desires for our lives. It's too often we seem to want to find out just how far we can get from God without incurring his wrath, when really we should be trying to see how close we can get to him by obedience and love. Now, verses 9 and 10 are the kind of scriptures many people wish weren't in the Bible. You see, they intrude into our finances. But there they are, and what should we do with them? Well, read, understand, and obey, of course. And I love that God does not actually give a dollar amount or a percentage for that giving. It doesn't. But it does say that what we give should honor God. Now, this helps us understand that what we give should flow from our hearts. Frankly, that's true for all things in our Christian walk. Now, when we show respect, love, and honor to the God who gave his best to buy us our freedom from the consequences of our sin, well, we should find it easier to give to him that which gives him glory and the honor he so richly deserves. And yes, the next verse does say that the natural outcome of a giving heart tends to be some form of prosperity. And it can be so. We know that our God is a generous God, and we know that he rewards those who obey him. But Again, I remind us, he is sovereign, and he is under no obligation to make us rich. No, but he will be pleased when we offer him a sacrifice which gives him praise and shows him our obedience. And that is what we should strive for. Let's look at verses 11 and 12. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in. Now, these verses here give us a warning and a promise regarding God's attention to our lives. If we are one of his children, we can expect him to provide direction for our lives. What father wouldn't? And when that guidance is ignored, forgotten, or deliberately disobeyed, we should expect a good, loving father to provide, well, let's call them incentives to return to his directives. Now, these could be something as gentle as the prompting of the Holy Spirit, or it could be, more than likely, some problems in your life, which are usually a result of the act or acts of disobedience that we are currently perpetrating. Now, the level of severity and the type of correction is God's to determine. But I have found that it is usually just enough to elicit the necessary response. Now, as much as we hate being disciplined, we should take comfort in at least two things. One, we are being corrected by a God who knows us well and can be trusted to provide just the right method to bring us back around to his way of thinking. And second, the fact that we are receiving his correction means that we are his child, and he is actively watching over us and watching over us for our own good. Now, I've also noticed in my experience that rejecting his correction or responding with bitter resistance usually increases in the intensity of the discipline and watching it being ramped up. You see, our spiritual walk, our becoming more like his son Christ, is too important to us and to God for him to allow us to continue in our sins. And resisting his correction, actually, it adds a new element because it's added a new sin to the necessary punishment. Because whatever we had been doing, we have now added rebellion and, in some cases, deliberate defiance to the original problem. Let's look now at verses 13 through 18, where we're going to leave the pattern of command and results, and start look at a short description of wisdom again. I love this. It reads as follows: Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed. Now, you want to know how God values wisdom and understanding? Well, in this passage, they are compared to the things of this world that most of us consider worth pursuing: silver, gold, rubies, long life, that is, health, riches and honor, a pleasant life, peace, abundant life and blessing. It is interesting that the list includes tangible wealth and intangible. As wonderful as it is to have wealth, Well, without the peace and health to enjoy it, money can be very empty and unsatisfying. Now, especially as we get up there in years, the intangibles can be even more important than the tangible wealth. Frankly, to have a peaceful, fulfilling life free from the ravages of the sicknesses which are related to a life filled with poor choices becomes more important than all the money in the world. Making wise choices and living with an understanding of what pleases our Maker truly is a tree of life. Choosing wisdom produces a blessed life as surely as living a sinful one produces some short term pleasures, but they're followed by a lifetime of misery and regret. Let's look at verses 19 and 20. By wisdom, the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding, he set the heavens in place. By his knowledge, the watery depths were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. Well, how important is wisdom and knowledge? Right here, it's pretty darn amazing. By these things, God himself created the universe and all the laws of physics and nature which enable its existence and its continuance. Seems to be pretty darn important in God's eyes. Now let's jump back here to the command and results pattern. We're going to look at verses 21 through 26. Here we see it says, "My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace your neck. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Have no fear of sudden disaster or of the ruin that overtakes the wicked, for the Lord will be at your side and will keep your foot from being snared." These verses again describe some of the more possible results of following wisdom. We see life mentioned here again. Added to that are safety, a lack of stumbling, a fear-free and sweet sleep, and the Lord being at your side during troubles. And what does it mean that wisdom, understanding, and sound judgment and insight become a, quote, ornament around your neck? Well, I think that when you live a life marked by these principles, you're going to gain a reputation which marks you like an expensive necklace. It draws the attention of the observer and shows what is important in your life. Doing what is right and good, being worthy of trust, and having earned the right to be respected. That is a great ornament. And who doesn't enjoy a great night's sleep? Being able to lie down without your mind racing and rehashing all the poor choices of the previous day, and then, of course, having to worry about all the possible consequences of those choices, is one of the best gifts you can give to yourself each evening. And remember, when I mentioned that these are principles and not promises, well, verse 26 reminds us that our life, even when we follow these principles, will not be free from troubles. It does not say that the Lord will keep us free from troubles, but it does say that he will be at our sides during them. It is, and I say this from long experience, it is a comfort to know that he is there when you need help. He does give you encouragement in these hard times. Sometimes he sends people to help. Sometimes he just gives you the strength. Sometimes he takes the problem away. Sometimes he walks you through it. And whatever path he chooses, you can be assured of his presence. And when you make it through, if you respond properly, not in bitterness, grumbling, and anger, you will be stronger, more like Jesus, and closer to God in the end. This is God's purpose for the trials he allows in our lives. And verse 27 and 28 repeats, do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back and I'll give it to you. See, now this is a little different from the verses we've seen already. This is actually a warning against the sins of omission. Now, there's a lot we could say about the lessons taught in this proverb. First, it departs again from the command and results pattern we've seen. Instead, it simply gives a command and then describes one course of action which should not be followed. You see, we are to do good, not withhold it, not even one day, when several factors come into play. First, there is a certain good that is due to the one who is going to receive it. Two, it is within our ability to give it. Three, we know of the need. And four, what is needed is in our possession at the time it is needed. Now, note that there are restrictions listed for the giving here. You see, we are not instructed to just give when asked. First, it has to be something which would be good for the receiver. In other words, it's due. You never, as an example, want to be a person who enables a harmful lifestyle. You never give money to an alcoholic or drug addict. That money will not help. It will only harm. It is not due to that person. And don't fund a person who wastes what they are given on frivolous expenditures. And next, it has to be within our means. We must always use wisdom when we give. Are the bills we owe paid? Will giving what has been asked prevent you from meeting the God-honoring provision for your family? And you need to be wary of those who preach that a lack of giving beyond your means reflects a lack of faith. Well, there is a huge difference between faith and foolishness. You see, God has given us these proverbs in order to learn wisdom and understanding. And we should use his wisdom, insight, and direction to make the choices in our life, not the twisted requests of those on the street corner or even in the pulpit when they demand the resources God has entrusted us. We have a responsibility to be wise stewards of what he has given. Now, verses 29 and 30 change the pattern once again. We're going to what we see a command and emphasis, where first comes the direction and next is a very good, detailed reason not to. It says, do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. Do not accuse anyone for no reason when they have done you no harm. Here again, we see that the evil we do originates in our thoughts. We should not let the evil nature that we were born with direct our minds after we have turned our lives over to God. We should be examples of love and ambassadors of the living God, not people who are marked by attempts to enrich ourselves and bankrupt others due to the whims of our old nature. Why? Why should we seek to do harm to someone who trusts us and has done us no harm? Should our litigious society be an influence on our behavior? You see, this cancel culture that we see in our society is a perfect example of this problem. The destruction of people due to imagined harm or political agendas is something we as Christ followers should never involve ourselves with. Verses 31 and 32. Do not envy the violent or choose any of their ways, for the Lord detests the perverse, but takes the upright into his confidence. This proverb, again, follows this command, reason, pattern. It says, well, keep in mind that God is never obligated, again, to give us the purpose for his orders, but he does sometimes. It does help us, you see, to make better choices and control our thoughts when we know his purposes, the way he thinks, and what pleases him. Now, first, why does God mention the envy of the violent and choosing their ways? Well, frankly, one leads to the other. Once again, we are back to the mind directing our actions. When we love or envy a behavior, we tend to adopt it. So if you love violence, you become violent. We see in verse 32 the way God views violence and perversity of all types. He detests it. Now, does that mean he never uses violence to accomplish his purposes? Of course not. The Old Testament is filled with examples of God using other nations and their armies to punish Israel and to punish other nations as well. But, and this is a very important difference, it is one thing for an all-knowing, wise, loving God to execute a righteous justice and a selfish, prideful person seeking power and wealth to use violence to accomplish their will. The last part of verse 32 talks about God taking someone who chooses a right path into his confidence. Why would he do that? Well, frankly, that person is following his ways, choosing to think in ways which is good and right. They seek peace and righteousness, and most importantly, they are submitted to his will. When we submit to God, he will guide our thoughts and our actions. And then God will give us insight into him that he would never give to someone who would only use such insight for selfish gain. Now, verse 33 is a nice, wonderful standalone statement here. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the righteous. Doesn't this make perfect sense that God curses the wicked and blesses the righteous? But could a cursed house still appear to be full and prosperous? I think so. It may be a cliche, but it is still true. Money can't buy happiness. A mansion filled with expensive things can still be filled with miserable people. Now, another set of Proverbs we will see soon is chapter 15, verse 17, where it reads, well, better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. And chapter 17:1, where it reads, better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. You see, wealth without peace and joy is empty and painful. But a blessed house filled with love and peace can, and in many cases is, still financially prosperous. And I think you will find the wealth is used in better ways by the members of that family and used in ways that please God and further his kingdom. Now, again, this is not guaranteed, but it is much more likely in a house where God's ways are being followed and is being blessed by him. Here's an interesting verse, verse 34. He, being God, mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed. Hmm. In what ways does God mock those who mock him? Here again, I see a need to look at this word mock. It is seldom used, and its meaning may not be clear to most. It certainly has a very negative undertone, and you may question, how could God mock? How could God do this? Well, this word, empaizo, is defined as to mock, trick, ridicule, or deride. In English, it also includes the idea of treating with disrespect. Well, why does God mock those who hate him? Well, knowing him as I do, I think there is probably a desire to goad them or prompt them into reevaluating their life and come to repentance. Once a person has become so proud that they are openly mocking God and his ways and people, they become nearly impossible to reach. But if anyone can find a way through their stubborn defenses, God can. And why does God show favor to those who are humble before him? Well, because they are in obedience to him. This is also a repeated theme in scriptures. God watches over the humble. He cares for them. He guards their paths. He keeps their feet from stumbling. He blesses the works of their hands. When we love him, we obey him and submit to him. And as a loving father, he shows us favor. Now, does this verse say that you need to be oppressed before God shows you favor? Oh, no. But it does show, again, that even when we go through tough times, we have help that the proud mockers can never expect or, frankly, believe in. In verse 35, we read, "The wise inherit honor, but fools get only shame." What kind of honor do the wise get? First, they get the respect from God that you would expect. And of course, it pleases God when we think and act wisely. And we can also, but not always, receive the respect of men. Those who give honor to the wise can be helpful in recognizing who are the wise and foolish men. Wise men usually honor those who live honorable lives. Foolish men, well, those who make choices which are, by definition, unwise. This old saying is also true. Birds of a feather flock together. Do the wise always receive the honors they are due? Well, experience shows us the obvious answer to the question is a resounding no. In many cultures, God's wisdom and truth are only given ridicule and derision. They are despised as narrow minded and bigoted. And worse, in some nations like China, North Korea, and most Muslim countries, believing in the God of the Bible and teaching and living according to his truths can carry severe penalties up to and including imprisonment and death. We read that fools receive shame as the natural result of their foolish thoughts, words, and behaviors. But why does shame rarely motivate a fool to amend their ways? Well, there can be many answers, but I am convinced that the primary cause is simply stubborn pride. See, once you start living a life marked by foolish choices and make statements which reflect your foolish thoughts, you are emotionally invested in defending those choices. Your pride won't allow you to retract your positions or apologize for the hurt your actions have caused. Your life centers around you, and the feelings of others and the damage to the lives of others will never be severe enough for you to admit that you are wrong in any way. Thank you again for listening to my podcast on Proverbs, God's ancient wisdom for our modern world. Join us again next week as we go into Proverbs Chapter 4. If you're looking for a book to help guide a Bible study on Proverbs, Colossians, James, or Romans, go on Kindle Books and do a search under my name, James Chapman, and you can find these books there. Well, we'll see you again next week, and God be with you.